to the March 2012 edition of the History Lecture Series. We're so glad to see you all here. We've got a special presentation for you tonight. Mr. Earl Hampton is going to talk about New Orleans streetcars, as you all know. And I wanted to let you know that of all the presenters that I've been involved with since I've been with the History Lecture Series, this gentleman is the most passionate about the subject that he is going to lecture on tonight. And I think that's going to deliver a really wonderful thing to you guys. Just a few notes. Of course, there's the sign up. If anybody here is new tonight, you put your name, email address, regular address, however you want us to get to you. And we'll make sure that you're on a mailing list to let you know when the next lecture is coming up, or an email to let you know that way. We're going to have next lecture, the projected lectures for next year. So we're going to get your input from that. We'll have a list of the ones that we've had in the past, get some suggestions from you so we can try to be in tune with what you want for next year. At this time, I want to present to you the gentleman who's going to let us all know about New Orleans streetcars, Mr. Earl Hampton.
Good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful day. I'm glad you took the time to come out and see me and hear my presentation about streetcars. It all started with me back at the ripe old age of 13 years old, about 1963. I met a young boy named Toby, and he collected transfers. It sounds strange, but it's an interesting hobby. There's actually a technical word for it. It's called paragermophily. But the fun was going to my mother's office, getting some change from her, going out to the St. Charles line, and then going to other bus lines in the city, getting transfers from that bus, then collecting them, just saving them, and see where the buses ran. And I got to see the city that way and got to know the lay of the land. So one thing led to another. My mother took note that I had an interest in transit, so she bought me a book, Streetcars in New Orleans by Louis Hennick. If you notice the date on this one is 1964 to the present. His went from 1835 to 1965. He did not cover the end of the Canal Street line back in 1964 very well because the book was already at the publisher. So he just put one or two photos in. I went into a little more detail in my book. I just dovetailed his work and continued onward up to the present day. At the age of about 22 or 23 years old, I tried to become a conductor or a motorman, as they're called. Either one, with New Orleans Public Service. But they told me that I failed the personality test. Hopefully tonight you'll see I've got a little bit of personality, so I may have proved them wrong. But one thing led to another, and eventually that led, with them turning me down, I wound up going to work for L&N Railroad. And there's a gentleman in the front row, John Booth, right here, that I had the privilege to work with for many years at the L&N, which is now the name of the railroad is now CSX. And used to be the scourge of Chalmette. When you were going north on Parish Road, you'd always get blocked by an L&N train. But anyway, I'm digressing a little bit. But my presentation tonight, here we go. It's going to go from the old canal streetcars, which I remember quite well, to the new canal streetcars, and I say everything old is new again. I remember also being in a bowling league in 7th grade, and I used to go down on the magazine trolley bus and transfer to the canal streetcar and ride out to Lucky Strike bowling lanes. Who remembers Lucky Strike bowling lanes on Canal and Claiborne? Okay. Not too, I guess I'm old enough then. Well, that's when I started noticing that the St. Charles cars were in good condition and the canal cars were in not such good shape. And eventually they they took the canal off and replaced it with buses, and I thought that was actually a good thing. Improved transit service from the lakefront to the downtown area. There were express buses, there was air conditioning, and then later on in life I realized it really wasn't such a good thing. So let's see if we can go. Here we go. Look, we went too far. Uh-oh. Can I go back one? There we go. Okay. In 1964, my mother and I used to go out for Sunday rides and go get ice cream. And she brought her little brownie camera with me and told me one day, she said, get out and take a picture of the streetcar. I said, why? And I said, well, they're taking them off. And so I did, and that's my only original photograph, and that's it. That is in the book. That's back at the cemeteries, and I think that's dated around February of 1964, right before they took them off. Wrong way. Here we go. Okay, here we go. I was too young to take pictures at that point. Like I said, I just had a little brownie camera with my mother. That was really my mother's. But I did manage to procure some slides of the old canal line. A nice gentleman sold them to me in New York back in 1972, and I got permission from him to use them in my book and use them in presentations. This is taken from the Canal Street ferry landing. If you remember, at the foot of Canal Street, you used to walk up the ferry landing and get across the railroad tracks and get on the ferry at that point, which is now gone. Also, you notice up here it says septic. It's not what you think. It's Dr. Titian's antiseptic. Here's a nice color shot of a streetcar heading towards a river at Rondoletton Canal. You can see all the old department stores too. There's Gaucho's, and there's Gus Meyer and Goldman's, I think it is, or Gold Rings. I think there was a shoe store, but this. I think this was on a Sunday, clear day on a Sunday morning in 1964 that this shot was taken. And this is further back, Canal Street. This is about 2 blocks north of Galvez. Like I say, these cars were in not such great shape at that time, and they were getting ready to take the streetcars off. They even ran while they were widening the street. You can see here the street. The street is being widened, and it didn't leave too much room for people to get off and on the streetcar. You notice the church in the background too. That's the one at Jefferson Davis, and that's the one they had the controversy in the '60s, I believe. They put up a sign that said "Thou shalt not park." So I don't know if anybody remembers that, but I do. Okay, and then the gloomy day of May 30th came, 1964. This was the real last run. This was the owl car, ran all night on Canal Street, the 958. And remember that number, 958, when I'll refer to it later on. But it was packed with streetcar buffs and people who just wanted to get one last ride. Left at about 4 a.m. in the morning, and from Canal on the river, and then pull right into the Canal barn. And this one pulled out. See the difference in the condition of the car. This one looks brand new. And they put a banner on the side, "See me on St. Charles," and when they got to Carondelet Street, they changed the sign from Canal to St. Charles, and the canal line was history. And I remember I wasn't on the last car. But I do remember speaking to someone who was, and they said they were so anxious to get started on the dismantling of the line that they cut the power at some point, and they didn't realize this car was still out there, so they had to reestablish power so the car could make it down to Carondelet. And then later that night, I remember taking a ride back to Canal Street, and they were out there with the jackhammers and the shovels and everything, digging up the rail. They didn't want any lawsuits filed or any trouble. They wanted to get rid of the line, period. Because there was a group that tried to save these old canal cars, but their tireless efforts failed. So, all right, here we go. Okay, there was about 75 streetcars when Canal and St. Charles ran. and about half of them were in really bad shape, and this is why they were getting ready to dismantle them. The other half were renovated on St. Charles. So after the last day, they just started taking the doors off, the poles off, the windows out, and then this was next. That's quite a sad sight. They actually cut it in half down the middle, and then half again this way, and hauled it off to the scrapyard. So this is what they were trying to prevent. There's another car cut in half and being hauled off. I think this was done on the Sunday afternoon after the last car pulled in. So that's how fast they wanted to get rid of these things. In 1964, there were 11 cars that survived the massacre, and they went to museums around the country. Most prominently, there's 2 museums in Pennsylvania that have 2 New Orleans streetcars that run today, and one in Massachusetts, and others. This car right here went to Dallas, Texas, to a railroad club there, but, oops, let me back up one. Here we go. But you can see they didn't take very good care of it. Yeah. It was pretty derelict at that time. But in 1985, when the city started looking at putting streetcars back on the river, or actually establishing the riverfront line, they looked to get 2 old New Orleans streetcars, 2 or 3 old New Orleans streetcars, bring them back to the city and renovate them, which is exactly what they did. They brought the 919 back home again. And like I say, they had a heck of a job to get this thing back into service, but here it is. They did a wonderful job putting it back together again and getting it running. But unfortunately, now it's surplus and it needs renovation again. What happened was they did get 4 streetcars back. One was not renovated until the 1990s, late 1990s. And they took the old streetcar, cut a huge hole in the side, and for wheelchair access. And the preservation said you shouldn't do that. That's an old vehicle. It should be protected. So that's why these cars were put on the side, and they built cars from the ground up, which is coming up. There we go. All right, this is the 952 when it was on Canal Street in 1964. This is a well-traveled car. It went to Chattanooga, Tennessee. Have you anybody that's ever been to the Chattanooga Choo Choo in Chattanooga? Where else would it be? Oh, well, anyway, they painted it yellow and they ran it around the grounds. And they actually had 2 streetcars. They had the 952 and the 959. And this car was deemed surplus by them, so they sent it back to New Orleans in 1990. And it was renovated as the 456. They changed the numbers to notice the different paint scheme and the new riverfront line. That's why they changed the numbers on those cars. But it ran on the riverfront from about 1991 until 1997, when RTA painted it back to the green again. So this car, like I say, it's been around. And from there, it went to San Francisco. And you can see it running there. They take pretty good care of that car. It's one of the few that really do care for the cars. They've got a second car also. It came, originally it left New Orleans in 1964. The 913 went to Paris Trolley Museum and they sold it to San Francisco, and it's awaiting funds for renovation to run along with the 952. So, here we go. There's another car that went to Birmingham, Alabama, the railroad club there, but they didn't know what to do with it. So it just sat there and deteriorated. You can see what kind of shape it's in. They sold it to the Seashore Trolley Museum in Maine. And there it is today. It was lovingly restored and runs in Lowell, Massachusetts at the state park there. I went up to the Connecticut area, I think it was 2007, to see this car, and two others. And this car, when we got to Lowell, we stayed there for like 3 days waiting for it to come out, and it never did come out because they said it was a chance of rain. I said, if they held back service in the lawns every time there was a chance of rain, we just wouldn't have anything. Actually, this car is run on the left. It's a new streetcar that's run by the National Park Service, and the old car is run by volunteers. So they said they were busy the week before, they were tired, so they didn't come out the following weekend when I was there. That was a little disappointing. And travel like 2,500 miles and not be able to see it. Anyway, I've got some more shots of Canal Street. These are courtesy of a friend of mine named Otto Gessel. And it shows some of the things they tried. Let me step away from the mic for a second. I guess you can still hear me. Mm-hmm. Okay, you look up at the top, see the car's got a metal roof, but look at the little windows at the top. They actually came off of the old red and white buses, and they tried that. And then one of the other variations was that these doors right here had indentations, and in order to save money, they made it a solid panel. So that's covered in my book also. There's a part of chapter 1 that's called Variations of Appearance, and eventually they settled on the final scheme was below, right there. That's where they look nowadays, pretty much. You know what? I take that back. They don't look like that today. They look like that from 1963 up until 1990, and at that point, again, excuse me from walking away from the mic. At that point, they were going to renovate the streetcars, but keep these type of doors. See, it's kind of roundish windows, and these had square windows with the doors like that. Yeah. And there was actually a pretty big controversy at the time that they were going to take the bodies, which they thought were in not great shape, and scrap them and build new bodies. And everybody said, well, what's left that's original? It's all it's going to be replicas. So they saved the bodies, and I stood up and suggested, I said, well, if you're going to renovate the cars, why not go back to the old look? So they did. They went back to the square windows at the top. The doors that look like that, but the bottom panels of the door have glass in it instead of being a solid panel. And they put the silver stripe back on the car, and they went to a larger number. So that's a little minor accomplishment in my little niche of history. That it's also covered in the book. Oh, too far. Back up. Let's see. Okay, here we are. Okay, this is a nice color shot of a car at Canal Street and the cemeteries. That's a pretty popular spot to get pictures of streetcars. And only in New Orleans would you get on a car marked cemeteries. And not even think twice about it. I'm going to the cemeteries today. What? All right. Oh, wrong way. Sorry. I'm still trying to get used to this clicker. And Nick, I'm doing okay, but I'm just trying to get used to it. There's another shot of 952. That's also inbound, taken from a different angle at Grondolet Canal. You can see D.H. Holmes in the background. That's the one good thing about, you take pictures of streetcars and then you realize after a while that you've got a lot of good stuff in the background that's just not there anymore. So that's a lot of fun. Whoops, I went too far again. All right, here we go. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Then came 1997. That's when the RTA built 6 streetcars for the riverfront line and 1 streetcar for Canal Street. And they wanted to make the width of the track. Mr. John can verify this. The railroad gauge is 4 foot 8 1/2. The streetcar gauge here is 5'2.5". So you can't run a 4'8" on a 5'2", you know, it just doesn't work. So they decided to, because originally the riverfront line was old railroad track. It was, in fact, it was the old L&N line. I don't know if you knew that, Mr. John.
Yeah.
But the riverfront line was the old L&N line that ran along the river. And they wanted to connect it to the St. Charles, so they have a place to put the streetcars at night, do maintenance, that sort of thing. So they built a little small stretch of track between the river and Barone Street. And they built this car right here. And if you look at the top, you see it's got a fake clear story roof.
Yep.
Clear story? I'm not sure which is correct. Maybe they're both correct. But you see the doors look like the old doors with the panels, and they numbered that 2001, that was their number series for the new cars. They eventually built 24 more cars, right here in New Orleans. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that fact, but they finished this one prototype car. They ran it from Barone Street to the river and back, and that was it. It was a way to get from the St. Charles line to the riverfront without walking. And then 2003 came, and they put in the rest of the line. They got the money, and you can see the rail on Canal Street. And here's a shot of them building the cars at Carrollton. That's something I think we should be proud of. These are homemade cars. That's really quite an accomplishment. And one man was a mastermind behind that, Mr. Elmer Von Dahl. And here's a shot of a car that's not quite done, but close. And there was such a crowding issue at the barn that they had too many streetcars and not enough tracks, so they had to leave one out on the street for about a week. So eventually they started taking the red cars and running them down to the river, putting them in like a dead track area and covering them with tarpaulins. And then they were tested on the St. Charles line. So I was like, I was just going bananas, you know, because I thought this was the best thing since sliced bread. You know, the red cars running up and down St. Charles, that's something you'll never see again, unless one's going back to the barn for maintenance. But they did what they call the 100-mile shakedown test, make sure everything's working. So here we go. Then opening day came. To April 4th, 18th, 2004. I didn't get much sleep that night. Finally got out of bed about 2-something and drove down to Clark and Canal, and there was already like 50 people out there, ready to ride the first one out of the barn. Okay, and there was a gentleman who gave out numbers. As she showed up, you know, I got number 57. I said, well, I'm probably going to be able to get on the first car. You can squeeze 57 people on the first car, which was fair, you know. It was the right thing to do. Well, the operator pulled out of the barn, stopped short, and let his family in, and all heck broke loose. You know, everybody started crowding on the streetcars, and we said, well, wait a minute. We had a system here to make sure that those who showed up an hour or two ago get on the first car. And the policeman on the streetcar said, this is nothing but another bus run. And I said, well, you must not be from here, is all I told him. So then almost 40 years to the day was dedication day. They cut the ribbon, so to speak. And they had 3 special streetcars, but I wasn't invited. So I had to walk from Barone Street to Liberty to get on a streetcar to go back towards the cemeteries to chase these, because I decided to ride a streetcar down that day to see it. I thought I'd do the right thing, you know, rather than try and take my car. And here's a couple of shots of the events that were going on. That's Mayor Nagin down at the bottom. I don't hear any boos. And Canal had set records for passenger loadings, I guess. I don't know, I guess that's the correct way to say it. They doubled the ridership. People that used to ride the bus, it doubled, went on the streetcars. And everything was fine. You see the top line? Until Katrina. I'm sure everybody here has got a horror story about Katrina. RTA's was that the entire Canal Street barn was flooded. The water went up to about here, which is a few feet above the electrical motors. You know, so they were all ruined. They couldn't run these anymore. So the Pearlies came back to the rescue. The St. Charles line, the lines were down because of the oak trees. But the streetcars were fine. They had no water in Carrollton. So they got a special exemption from the federal government and the ADA people to run it. They just wanted to provide service and get something going again. You know, maybe lift people's spirits. You know, you see the streetcars back in Canal Street. But this was like, again, this is just great. I'm out there every day just about as often as I can. My camera taking movies and pictures, and that's one of the best shots I've got right there. And there's two of them at Galvez. Now, after Katrina, I was in touch with the fellow who ran the shop, and he said, we'll put the green cars back on Canal Street. And I said, I was in Memphis, and he said, I told him, I said, yeah, I'm gonna be back down there in a couple of weeks. I'll come see you and we'll talk about it. And I told him, I said, well, are you gonna reconfigure the doors on these cars? And he goes, huh? I said, yeah, if you're on a green car, from Claiborne to the river, you're fine, the door opens on the right. But from Claiborne back, the stops were in the middle, and again, excuse me. These doors were push doors that were operating from the other end of the car. So the operator couldn't open this door to let people out. He had to let people out on the street side, and I told him to be careful getting back to the middle of wherever they were going. So I got the great idea to reconfigure the doors and have it open on this side, and then put the stops in the middle on St. Charles. And he says, I got 2 workers here. I don't know how I'm gonna do that. So that didn't work. Everybody was scattered to the 4 winds with Katrina. So. And there's a Christmas time, 2006 maybe, 2005. Yeah. You see a custom house in the background, the Marriott Hotel. And always like to get shots like this, it's 1964 all over again. And then finally, the federal government gave RTA a little bit of money to renovate the red cars. Well, everybody remembers the snowfall of 2008, right. December the 11th. That was the last day that the green ones ran in full service on Canal. The next day, they had 4 cars out on the Canal line, but it wasn't enough to provide service. They needed 2 on the City Park run and 5 on the Canal. So you had basically 2 red cars on Carrollton to solve the problem of driving down Carrollton Avenue. You don't put people out into the street, you put them on the neutral ground. So that was my ambition at that particular time, to get these 2 side by side, a red and a green meet, and there's another one. And they were hard to time, because you only had like maybe 6 streetcars on Canal Street at one time. So like I park the car and stand there and wait, and then when I realized where the meet was, I take off running. I caught this one at Broad Street. And this is my favorite right here. There's a little story behind this one. This is taken at the corner of Rampart and Canal. You can see the Lowe's Theater in the background, the Joys over behind it. I just sailed through a yellow light. There's a policeman here, so I gotta be careful. It was yellow. And the green car had passed, and the red car was stopped. And I thought the green car was going to keep going. You know, they have a tendency to run red lights, so they fly through red lights. So I said, well, that's a miss. Well, when I realized that the green car had stopped, I stopped my car right in the middle of Canal Street, put my emergency flashes on in the left lane, got out, and got this picture. And that's my favorite all-time picture that I ever took of a streetcar, and it's in the last page of the book. Okay. Now, you remember the 972 was the last car on Canal in 1964. There it is running again on Canal near the cemeteries. I had a great idea to have a ceremony. You know, I was happy that the Pearlie Thomas cars, that's the manufacturer of these cars, Pearlie Thomas of High Point, North Carolina. But anyway, I was happy that the Pearlie Thomas cars were able to return to service, give good service for about 4 years. I said, we need a celebration of sorts. I said, you know, we'll do the same thing. I was going to take another car and get a magnetic stick-on thing, like, you know, signs of a truck in green, put 958 on it, and replicate what happened in 64. The 958 would leave Canal and the river, go into the barn. The 972 would be sitting there with a banner that said, "Read See Me on St. Charles," pull out to the cemeteries, come down to Carondelet. But instead of it being a funeral-like atmosphere, it was going to be a happy celebration. Everybody would get off the 72 and get on the new red streetcar and have a good time, you know, just. But the RTA said they couldn't do it because it would interrupt service. And I said, what service? I said, you got to wait 25 minutes for a streetcar on Canal Street. I said, we can do a ceremony in 15. I said, you want to invite the mayor, get some good PR? They wouldn't go for it. So I tried. And there it is right there. I didn't take a ride that day. I'm sorry, I didn't. I should have parked the car, got on that car, and just rode around for a little ways. Well, after a while, the Greens returned to St. Charles. The Reds were back on Canal, and everything is, quote, normal again. Come on, here we go. Here we go. And there's two cars back at the end of St. Charles. And oh, I went too far. Shoot. That's the end of my slide presentation. Oh, I went back up again. Let's see. Here we go. And like I always, try it again. See down at the bottom it says yours truly. That's my signature. All right. I do miss them on Canal. And those two cars that are in storage, I really pushed hard to get those renovated and put into service on Canal Street as tourist cars. You know, you show me out-of-town driver's license, drop a quarter in the fare box, and take a ride, and we'll tell you all about Canal Street and the city. But they said they couldn't do it because they needed to have the wheelchair accommodations, and it just doesn't work. And so that idea went down the drain. Now they want to take the two cars and strip them out and maybe put in some tables. And you get on the car at Carrollton and Claiborne, and it would be like a catering service that would come on board and have a meal, take a ride out of St. Charles and back. And I said, well, if you can do that, you know, without handicap accessibility, why can't you do the other thing? He said, we don't know. So anyway, so that's the end of my presentation, and I'm open for questions. I think I have about maybe 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah. How long do you think to build the streetcars in New Orleans?
Long.
Would it took about a year?
Maybe 9 months per car. They had an assembly line. They'd start with the floor, and then they move the car down and get the body, and then the next spot would get the roof. Then they move to the other track and get the windows, and then go in the paint shop. You know, so maybe 9 months. Anyway, yes.
I have this question I've been posing for years.
Okay.
Instead, I only remember streetcars being green.
Okay.
What made them so effective?
Okay, let me see if I can explain to you the way it was explained to me. The green paint job is protected under the National Historical Landmarks Association. So it can't be copied. So, even in the same city, it was just the St. Charles streetcars were green. So they decided to paint the riverfront line red. And they were going to paint the canal line a royal blue with the yellow and the white. I thought that would have been really nice, you know.
The original canal street was that great?
They were. But that was before they were put on the National Register of Historic Places.
And so they couldn't paint the canal street green?
No, they couldn't. So anyway, yes.
I realize your coverage is from the sixties. Can you tell us, when did they actually begin to have streetcars on Canal Street in St. Charles?
Okay, 1893 was the first electric cars.
Thank you.
Okay. And those were the little bitty cars. They call them single truck cars. They're about half the size of the green cars. And as service required them to get larger cars for more people in the 20s. And in fact, I think they maxed out at 225 miles in the whole city of streetcar lines. And from there, it just began to decline. So, anyway. Another question over here.
I have a friend of mine that worked for Entergy, and he said one of the problems they had was it was with DC electric,
Mm-hmm.
and he says that when they had a problem, he said they had to go to some mill shop to get parts made because none of that stuff existed anymore.
That's true. That's true. The New Orleans Public Service had to well, they've had a lot of extra parts left over from Canal Street that they saved. But when those ran out or wore out, they had to make things new, like the motors, the controllers. The seats are all handmade at the barn, you know. So, okay. I'm sorry, I can't see very well. Here we go. Yes.
How come the difference in the roofs on the tops of the streetcar?
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. I meant to say that when I had that picture of the 2001 up there. The fake roof up there with the plastic is to hide the air conditioning. Okay. So it really would look pretty ugly if they had left it open, you know, but they decided to bring a fake fake roof and hide it. So now the riverfront cars don't have air conditioning, so they look exactly like the St. Charles cars. Yeah.
What year did the red ladies go on?
1988. That was the year that we had the Republican National Convention here in New Orleans. So, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. And they just got finished restoring the 7 cars for the riverfront. They were flooded at Canal, so the green ones actually ran on the river at one time too. And I wish I had a photograph of that, but I don't have it with me. Excuse me, one second. Okay, all right. Let's see, more questions. Yes.
Wasn't there a repair or renovation going on Magazine Street at one time?
Yes, there was, right where the Bromart is and the Walgreens. I remember as a kid seeing this really ugly building with corrugated iron on it, steel, aluminum, and they had tracks going in, they had doors and had tracks going in, but that all disappeared when they built the Walgreens.
I think the whole
I'm sorry? No, that's the Arabella barn. Yeah, that was just a storage facility. They had a shop on Magazine near Louisiana. So, okay, now in the back.
I can remember as a teenager catching the bus on Douglas and Delray by Jackson Barracks
Mm-hmm.
with all my crabbing gear, and that's it, winding up at West End. Three different call lines, Canal, West End, St. Claude, and returning the same way, if you can imagine. 14 cents.
14 cents, that's right.
Free transport.
Yeah, that's what I used to, that's another thing I wanted to point out. I've got a couple props. before 1971, they used to have a conductor on the rear and a motorman on the front when everybody was on board. I'm glad you mentioned that, by the way, thank you. Who would collect your 7-cent fare. And if you didn't have a couple pennies, he would have a little changer that he'd give him a dime, and you'd click it once and 3 pennies would come out and give it back to you, give you a free transfer. Then he would ring up the fare on this. I can't, unfortunately, I can't hold it up and work it at the same time. It's too heavy. All right, now, if you got on at a transfer point, and then once everybody was on board and ready to go, $2 to the motor, and off we go. 1971, there was a rash of burglaries on the buses. The people were robbing the bus drivers of the money, so they decided to go with the exact fare system where you had to put the money in the fare box, like today. And then they determined that the conductor was no longer needed, so they put the fare box next to the motorman, and you had a one-man car. And the city council didn't allow one-man cars in New Orleans in 1926. They said we had to have 2 men, and that prevented us from getting a modern streetcar called the PCC in the 40s. So it kind of saved the old cars, basically, is what it did. So let's see. Yes.
Yeah, what is the current fare?
$125. That's a bargain.
And why did the Pearlies saved after Katrina and everything else was ruined?
Oh, the Carrollton barn was at Carrollton and Willow. They had no water. Canal barn was at Broad and Canal. That's the lowest point in the city, basically. It's like the bottom of the saucer. It had like maybe 5 feet of water. And if it was just water, it wouldn't be so bad. They had diesel buses parked right next to the streetcars. So they got the oil from the buses and the diesel fluid, and it just turns into a nasty corrosive mix, and it just ate the motors up. My friend Delmer told me, he said if they let him get in there with a pressure washer, the week after the water went down, he might have been able to save them, but they said, nope, it's a declared, can't run. Yeah, it's like, gonna need some money from us, and we gotta wait a few years, so, yes.
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
How many transfers can you get with $1.25?
None.
And when I was a kid, they used to put pennies on the track and let the cars run over them and flatten them out.
I think kids are into more different things this year. Like iPods and cell phones, they don't care about flattened pennies. But back to your transfer question, you have to pay 25 cents extra to get a transfer. And it's not even a transfer nowadays like they used to have. It used to tear off, and you could look at the time and say, oh, I got 2 hours, to use it, And sometimes you could cheat, like if it went past, you could hold the transfer where the driver couldn't see the time and tear off the ticket. So one time I was riding around, and I rode from Carrollton and Claiborne down the canal, and I was on the way back by Louisiana Avenue, and the conductor came up and said, I need 15 cents for the return fare. And most of the time they let me ride for free. But and I collected the transfers too. In fact, they open up the sign box at the end of the day and get about maybe 300 transfers out of it, and just throw them in the box at my house. I still got them. But anyway, nowadays, when you get on the streetcar, say for example, you get on at the canal line at the cemeteries, and all you have is a $5 bill. Well, it used to be that the RTA would take that $5 and say, thank you for the $2.50 contribution if you had 2 people, okay? Well, nowadays they have you put the $5 in, and the driver hits the button for 2 people, and a credit comes up for $2.50. So you can use that credit on the other end and come back. So I'm glad you're doing it. I don't think my cell phone's on buzz. Anyway, so, question, yes.
Really two things. First of all, I remember the transfers being different colors.
Yes, and once a month they change colors.
Okay, so and the second thing I remember was, which is, I probably told much of an anachronism nowadays, there was a leather pouch with a clock, a watch on the side there, and once in a while you have a guy in a blue uniform with a cap and a clipboard that was standing by the bus stop and trolley stop to make sure, I mean, they had to be on time. They'd drive slow or they'd drive fast. They had to be on that spot every time the sign said.
Right, exactly.
What happened to that?
The union.
Well, supposedly they've got a schedule and they adhere to it today, but it seems like you wait a lot longer for a streetcar nowadays because they just haven't, the service hasn't come back up to what we've had before Katrina. You know, not everybody's back, so they don't feel like they don't need as many streetcars on the line. So, but I remember that. In fact, one time I was standing at the corner of Washington, Napoleon magazine, and I had a black trench coat on, and I had a watch like that. So I'm standing there, and I'm looking at my watch, and the bus driver goes by and he goes, "Oh no, it's ahead of schedule," or something like that. He thought he was going to get written up, but he didn't. You know? That was one of my strange childhood memories. You know? Yes.
I imagine they do, but do they still flip the backs of the seats over when
Yes.
they change direction?
That's correct. Yeah, they do. Even the new canal streetcars, when they hit the cemeteries, there's a few seats that flip over, and then they had the long seats. They used to call them beauty seats. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but that's where the ladies sat in the front. So that was the term they used, the beauty seats. Let's see.
Any more questions?
Oh, here we go. Yes, ma'am.
When I was going to high school with Broadway, I had to take this thing called streetcar, and I was so short, I couldn't reach the straps. The doctors would let me stand in the back while that. Is there a problem?
Yeah, they used to have the porcelain straps too that used to flip in the up position when they weren't in use, and you grab one and pull one down. But then they went to the leather straps, you know, in the 60s. And there's also, if you stand in the middle of the car, there's a little handle to hold onto on the seats. It's made out of brass. You can hold that too. I remember one of the fun things I did when I was a kid. There used to be a section of track on St. Charles that was a little bit rocky, and it was, needed some leveling, straightening, and tamping and resodding. But anyway, it was at around Adams Street, I think, on St. Charles. And I used to have a friend who was a motorman. He said, "What you do is just hold on to the pole and don't go against the car when it sways. Just hold on and go as the car goes, you go too." And he notched it up to eight points, and he was doing about 30 miles an hour going through that bad section. It's like, it's fun. I was scared to death. And one other thing too, I'm sure everybody remembers when sometimes when a streetcar would start off, he'd start a little too fast, and the overhead circuit breaker would kick out, and it would be like an explosion, and send sparks and everything. You stand underneath one of those, and all of a sudden it pops. It's like you're ready to run for the hills. One fellow said he had a car and used to send gold dollars down my collar. So anyway, yes.
One of the little tidbits, in the late 40s, I used to go to Del Gas.
Mhm.
Get the city called across the canal street.
Mhm.
I would get the bed open, now after school.
Mhm.
And the lady there was St. Charles Avenue, and said, if you remember the street, Spanish car that little piece was tear off. I'd get my Spanish car and St. Charles car. I'd have to set a city car, and I'd give part of the canal off. I got to the truck for the lady going home. I'd give her the rest of it, she ride, and we swap. One day she paid 7 cents to make that.
You probably can still do that today. but the problem would be, well, let's see, she must have lived uptown or something and went on like the Jackson or something. You couldn't go back on Canal Street, because once the transfer was issued one way, you couldn't return. So, yes.
First question, if I'm not mistaken, don't they have flywheels underneath, because of the clanking sound, right? So when they break, they transfer the power to a flywheel, does that ever work?
That's a bit technical. I'm not.
Because I was always under the impression, because you had this underneath it.
Oh, that's the compressor you're hearing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the air compressor.
Okay.
It builds up enough air in the tank to stop the car.
Okay, I was always told, that's what I was curious about, there was a flywheel, and they generated the energy to it spun. And then when they took off again, they tapped into the flywheel to get the initial energy to go up, so it wasn't that much of a strain.
It was strictly a rheostat controller. When you notched it out, it would go like 115 volts up to 300, halfway, and then 600 the entire way. And that would send the juice down to the motor would turn the wheels and off with it. Anyway, okay, yes.
One year they had a streetcar strike, is that right?
1973?
1929.
Oh, 29 also, yeah. That was a little before my time. Yes. That was taken off in 1951. I was born in 51, so didn't ride the belt. No, 1951. It had been removed and I was born in November. It was removed in like September or August or something. Okay, all right, one more little thing. I have to acknowledge someone who helped me with the book a great deal. These are from my co-editor, Lillian Gross. That's why you had to close your eyes. Okay, without her help, the book would not be possible, because growing up a Streetcar fan, there was language that I'm sure you're familiar with. If you're technically involved in some sort of subject, there's language that you use that Joe Average wouldn't understand. So I'd give her a chapter and let her read it, and she'd say, you have to put this into English for me. So she helped me get it to the point where everybody can understand what I'm saying, but keep it close to where I wanted it. So she was a tremendous help. Thank you. I do have books for sale afterwards. If I can duck out first, I'll be at the table, and they're $25, and they retail for $30. 25, and I'll personalize it for you. So, thank you very much.
Okay, you can really see that a lifelong passion just kind of shines through. It makes it very interesting, I think. So yeah, like I said, he is going to be set up in the back for more books. I also want to say very quickly that even in my generation, when I was a kid, we didn't get too excited about flattening pennies. And so, not that I'm saying anybody's old or anything like that, but anyway. So. And then finally, kind of a good partner to the History Lecture Series. Later on in the month, Saturday, March 17th, the Los Isleños Fiesta is going to be held. And Dot Bench is going to have some information in the lobby as you leave as well as on display a commemorative plaque, if y'all like to take a look. And I think that's it. So it's been a great lecture tonight, and thanks for coming.